Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Superhero Ethics Podcast. Today, I'm really excited. We are going to be recording an episode on Harley Quinn, the character and the different roles she has played in all sorts of different media. Unfortunately, Jacob is not able to join us today. He's taking a little break. Hopefully, we'll have him back soon. But in the meantime, we are joined by a frequent guest and someone whose opinions I have always really greatly enjoyed and will often challenge me in some good ways, Jessica Plummer. Jess, how are you doing today?
Hi. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. For our listeners who haven't heard some of your back episodes, can you want to say just a word or two about sort of where you come from on these questions and sort of what you're bringing?
Sure. Yeah, I'm just a big superhero nerd. I've been reading comics. Well, I've been reading comics my whole life, but I've been especially reading superhero comics, primarily DC, for about 15 years. And I honestly wouldn't say I'm a huge Batman fan or a huge Harley Quinn fan, but I still feel very protective of her.
Yeah.
Like, I don't necessarily want to read her comics, but if you step to her, we're going to fight. And yeah, I'm really excited to talk about her.
Cool. I wanted to say a quick word that we're recording this on November 5th, on Guy Fawkes Day. And on the Twitter for this account, Superhero Ethics, I wound up doing a live tweet of the V for Vendetta movie, including a lot of discussion of some of the ethical questions that comes up. So whenever you're listening to this, please check that out. I think there'll be a lot of good discussion to be had there. But diving into today's topic, and I will admit to our listeners that we're going to be rushing a little bit today, because as Jessica has reminded me, tonight is also when the live showing of The Little Mermaid is on. With, among other things, Queen Latifah as Ursula. So we're hoping to get out of here in time to see all that. But let me start with this, because Jessica, I think you were the one who suggested Harley. What for you makes her and the way her story's been told an interesting topic to dive into?
So I've actually been thinking about Harley a lot lately, and I write for BookRiot.com, and I actually literally yesterday just submitted an article that I've been working on for some time about her, which will probably be up by the time this episode goes up. But I noticed recently that she's, like I said, I'm not a huge Harley Quinn fan. Like, I don't go out of my way to find stuff with her in it. But I noticed recently she's actually really omnipresent. When I started to look into it, I realized she can actually go toe-to-toe with Batman for most appearances per month in DC Comics, which is absolutely insane to me. She far outnumbers Wonder Woman in appearances. This was not the case 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, not so much. And those appearances are kind of all over the map. I just finished reading Breaking Glass, which is the new YA graphic novel that came out in September by Mariko Tamaki and Steve Pugh, and it's fantastic, but it's an age-appropriate YA novel, and then you have these really, really dark books coming out of Black Label, and I'm just right now really fascinated by Harley and how omnipresent she is, how completely ubiquitous she is, and how different all these different versions of her are, and how different the target audiences for them are, and whether that is something that DC can honestly ethically do, or if they're being kind of gross.
Yeah, I think there's some really good questions there. I know certainly in just looking at the evolution of the character from her origins in the Batman the Animated Series, and tracing how much she's changed, and here I'm just talking about on screen, but going into the video game portrayal and then in the recent movies, and I know, just adding to that ubiquitousness, she both has a TV series coming out quite soon on DC Online, on the DC Universe streaming network, whatever that's called, as well as the movie.
That's what it's called, DC Universe.
Perfect. As well as the movie that's coming out once again with Margot Robbie in 2020, which I believe is Birds of Prey.
It is, but the subtitle is "And the Fabulous Emancipation of Harley Quinn," or like "One Miss Harley Quinn." It's like a really long subtitle, but her name is in the subtitle.
Yeah. It definitely seems like it is a girl gang movie, but with her very much as the lead and as the star. Um, so can we start with, and you probably can know this better than I. Can you give just kind of like a brief overview of tracing that history and that evolution? Because I think, especially I think today, a lot of people, especially if they're more casual, their first introduction to the character may have been Suicide Squad, or may have been, actually for quite a lot of people, the Arkham Asylum video games. And obviously her history goes back further than that to the animated series. And her character and especially her outfits have changed quite dramatically in that time. Can you kind of just sketch that out a little bit, what that evolution's been like, and especially fill that in as well from the comic side for those of us who don't know that as well?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, like you said, she debuted in the Batman animated series from the 90s. So I think about 1992. And she at first was just sort of a comic relief sidekick for the Joker. Like he just needed to have hench people around, and she was one of them. But she was really popular. She had this great design by Bruce Timm. She had a wonderful voice by Arlene Sorkin. And this is sort of a not pet peeve of mine, but like an axe that I like to grind, that characters who first appear in animation really should get their voice actors as part of, like, credited as a co-creator, because without that voice, we would not have the Harley we have today. Like, she would be forgotten.
That's very true.
So in 1994, DC put out a special edition comic called Mad Love, which was by Paul Dini and Bruce Timm, who were the creators of the animated series. So it was completely in that style, in that continuity, and it tells Harley's origin, which is that she was a psychiatrist named Harleen Quinzel, which is a real name that people can definitely have, who got a job at Arkham Asylum because she wanted to be assigned to the Joker so that she could write a tell-all book about him and make millions. But instead, he manipulated her into falling in love with him and drove her insane.
Yeah.
And she broke him out of Arkham, came up with her own supervillain identity and her own costume, and that's how she sort of became a supervillain. But Mad Love is also very famous because it ends with she basically almost kills Batman. The Joker is furious that she did a better job than he did. So he beats the crap out of her, throws her out a window.
Yeah.
And at the end of the comic, she's in the hospital, and a nurse is like, well, I hope you see like how stupid you've been falling in love with somebody like that. And she says, yeah, he hit me. And then she sees that he's left her flowers. And she says, and it felt like a kiss, which... Oof. He hit me and it felt like a kiss is a girl group song from the 60s that actually was not popular because people were horrified by it.
Courtney Love then covered it, didn't she?
I think so, yeah. And so it was actually, I fell down this rabbit hole of doing the research into Harley Quinn and then doing the research into this song. So it's by Carole King and Jerry Goffin, who wrote, tons of these girl group songs before Carole King became sort of the Earth Mother Carole King that we all know and love. And they came up with this because their babysitter showed up to work and she had a black eye.
Oh, boy.
Their babysitter was Little Eva, who recorded the original Locomotion. And they were like, why are you dating a guy who hits you? And she said, that was a direct quote. She said, he hits me and it feels like a kiss. And they were so horrified by that they wrote this really disturbing song that was meant to highlight that it was disturbing. It wasn't meant to glorify abuse. And I think the fact that this line is something a real person actually said, kind of not intentionally on anybody's part, but it really goes to show like why Harley connected with people right from the beginning. Because there's something about her, even though she was a literal cartoon character, and she's always been a very cartoonish cartoon character, there's something about her that is very relatable and human in this dark way that is really hard to grapple with.
Well, and that story is so interesting. I did not know those details, because in some ways it's kind of a version of what happens with the Harley Quinn character herself, in that, as my understanding, and again, I hope you get to, when I stop interrupting you, you'll get to keep filling us in. But that to some extent, at least my memory of some of the original iterations of the character in the animated series is it is very clear that her relationship with Joker is a horrible one, and that her getting free of that is a good thing, which has evolved to the current day, and the Suicide Squad movie, and we'll definitely talk about this more later, but the era of, which may now be coming to a close, but who knows, of the Joker and Harley being presented as this like fantastic, dark, kinky romance. And then the two of them often being held up as relationship goals. So just knowing again that version of, that this comes from a very dark place, that song comes from a very dark place, even though it got them, kind of very misunderstood. It seems like an interesting mirror for what's happened with the Harley character herself.
Yeah, definitely. And would hope that portrayal of Joker and Harley as like any kind of love story is something that is going away, but I'm not confident that it is.
Yeah.
But just to be a little less verbose than I have been and answer the rest of your original question, Harley was so popular that in 1999 she was folded into the regular DC universe with the same backstory. She was basically the same character in the same costume, and she was just sort of a regular Batman villain, mostly hanging out with the Joker for probably about a little less than a decade. She was increasingly paired up with Poison Ivy and often Catwoman as well, especially in Gotham City Sirens. And then with the 2011 Rebirth, New 52, she became a member of the Suicide Squad, right, which she had not historically really been affiliated with before. And it's it makes total sense. It's a good match because Harley had always been a sympathetic villain who really, it was very clear that she could do good things and could be portrayed with a heart of gold in the right story. So she's a great fit for this series, which is about, villains doing good in unpredictable and violent ways.
Right.
It makes sense. But at that point, first of all, the New 52 was a mismanaged disaster all around. And also, as you mentioned, she had started appearing in video games, especially the Arkham Asylum ones, and she was getting more and more popular there. And they had changed up her costume to be a lot more revealing.
Right.
So starting with the New 52, she dropped her classic red and black Harley Quinn costume and started wearing just like the skimpiest things that they could possibly draw her in. And that hasn't really changed. She doesn't really have an official costume anymore. She just kind of wears whatever the artist feels like drawing her in, which that it depends on the artist, how well that comes off. But from that point in 2011, when she joined the Suicide Squad, it's just been like this exponential growth of her appearances and her popularity. So apparently in 2016, when DC did Rebirth, her Rebirth #1 shipped more copies than any other Rebirth comic.
Wow.
Which is insane to me. It sold almost, it was something like, I want to say it was 360,000, and the next closest was a Batman comic at 290,000. That, she blew him out of the water.
Yeah.
And DC has increasingly been putting out miniseries about her and spin-offs about her and one-shots about her. And just in October, she headlined 5 different comics in 1 month. Yeah. Which, again, only Batman and Superman ever do that or have ever done that.
That's so interesting. And just as one more data point, I did some asking of my friends in different venues about her character. And one thing I heard is that I have a number of friends in various cosplays communities, people who go to do either photo shoots or events dressed up as different characters from comic books or video games or the like. and a number of them attend, cons on a fairly regular basis. And something I heard across the board was that it's now gotten to the point where if they look at a room of cosplayers and don't see at least double the number of Harleys as any other costume, they're amazed. Because it's just kind of one more place where it's become such a ubiquitous thing, and again, where it's become that look especially.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because you don't have to figure out a way to sew or purchase that, Harley Quinn costume anymore. You can just cobble together something that sort of resembles a look she's worn in the comics or the movie look or just whatever you want to do, which I think that that's great that this costume is so accessible. But yeah, DC has also stated that they have like a thing about Harley on their website, and they're like, she's the most popular Halloween costume. But that's like the whole sentence, and I'm like, in the world, what? Well, I don't know what that means.
Right.
But certainly it's true that she is an incredibly popular Halloween costume and an incredibly popular cosplay costume.
Yeah. What do you think is the reason for that explosion in the character more recently? I'm guessing certainly when in my kind of just more casual understanding of it, the images that I see of Harley, in memes or in other sort of formats on social media, it's always the Margot Robbie portrayal. And certainly the cosplay and stuff that I see, it's very often a try to copy of that particular portrayal. How much of a role do you think that the Suicide Squad movie had in that explosion? Certainly it seems like that was a big part of bringing her to a much wider appeal. Or do you think there's other reasons why the characters really sort of had this exponential growth that you're talking about?
Yeah, no, I think that's a huge part of it. I do think it started before that, and that's part of why the character was in the movie at all. Although, the movie also has Captain Boomerang and Enchantress, so I'm not saying you have to be like an A-lister to get into a DC movie, because you for sure do not.
Certainly it's not Killer Croc. No, it is Killer Croc, right?
Yeah.
His Halloween costume has not spiked in popularity.
No, it's weird. You don't see tons of Killer Crocs around. And yeah, actually, my thing with the Suicide Squad was always the Joker shouldn't be there because it shouldn't be any A-listers. It should be Z-listers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the movie is a huge part of it, because the fact of the matter is the comic book reading population is a tiny percentage of the movie-going population. You might sell 20,000 copies of a comic book and call it a great month for sales, and then the movie turns around and makes $500 million in a weekend. It's just completely, the scales are completely different. And I don't think anybody thinks that Suicide Squad was a good movie. I will be honest, I have not seen it.
Yeah.
But I don't know anybody who is like, what a good movie. I know multiple people who are like, what a bad movie, but they have worn the Harley Quinn costume anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it is because even though it's not, from what I understand, she doesn't really have a storyline that is necessarily to be celebrated in that movie. Margot Robbie is an amazing actress, and she's a really, there's something very likable and charismatic about her. So I think people are drawn to the roles that she plays. And when you dress up in a costume, you want to look good, you want to look cute, you want to look sexy. This is a normal thing. I feel that feeling when I put on a costume too, and this is a costume that allows you to do that. So I completely get that. It's also great if you're looking for a couple's costume. I am not saying that Joker and Harley are relationship goals by any means, but they are easy costumes to do for a couple, and they're recognizable. So if you're going to con with someone, a boyfriend, a friend, anybody, and you want to do matched costumes, because going with someone whose costume matches yours is always better, because people get twice as excited.
Yeah.
Then it totally makes sense. But I also think that a big part of it is that in 2013, so before the movie, Amanda Connor took over drawing and co-writing Harley's book, and she has since become really, really strongly associated with the character. And she's a hugely popular artist, and she has a very cheesecakey style of art, but it's a cheesecake that retains the character's personality. Like, it's not just boobs, that you feel like that's a human being
Right.
who has a brain and emotions, and her work is very funny and it's very appealing. And having her on that book, it appeals to all readers. It appeals to readers who are just looking for cheesecake. It appeals to female readers. It was a huge boon for DC in making this character more popular to a wider range of readers. And she was on that book for a long time, and I think that can't be discounted, that she had a huge influence there.
Yeah. And I can definitely see that, especially because, I've always thought that one of the real appeals of the character, even as she's taken on this much more sexualized role, is that there is a strong, in some of the portrayals of the character, there is a strong ethos of her being very sexual on her own terms and her owning this in her own ways, which you can then argue quite a lot about because of, certainly many of the portrayals of her have not been that. They've been very much for the male gaze. But my understanding, not all. And I know that Margot Robbie talked quite a lot about her understanding of the character in those kind of terms, which I think is, I did see the Suicide Squad movie. I'm not going to go back and do it again.
So sorry.
There's a whole podcast about it. And I'll admit, it is in many ways a movie I love because it's the only good portrayal I've seen in live action of probably my favorite DC character, Amanda Waller. And I find her portrayal in this so much better than on Arrow.
I will totally come back for the episode on Amanda Waller, by the way, because I love her.
Good. Yeah, she's one of my... we're definitely scheduling that at some point soon, too. But it is so disheartening to see this story that's supposed to be about her being this terrifyingly sexy, scary, empowered person who also, though, absolutely melts the first time the Joker looks at her. And the movie does have that entire love story of basically her being this, it's, on the one hand, they're saying she has this great personality. On the other hand, they're showing us that the Joker completely made her personality. Not to mention all the thoughts that I know you and I both have about the psychiatrist falling in love with her patient story, which, if you want to hear me and Jessica talk about at great length, go listen to our episode on the second season of The Punisher, because there's a lot about it. It's that exact same story told all over again.
I think we just called that character Harley Quinn, because I don't remember what her actual name was.
Yeah, no, it's a Harley Quinn story all over again. It's just Marvel's version of it. But yeah, so building off of that though, let me actually just go back to the evolution of her story. I know that in pop culture, there's now this evolution towards her character having left the Joker and becoming much more involved with a number of other female villains / antiheroes, and that there is on some level a romance that is either explicitly or implicitly implied by different DC properties with Poison Ivy. And I've heard that discussed a lot, both in terms of queer coding or queer support or queer baiting in different versions. I did see that the newest TV show has a description of her relationship with her best friend, Poison Ivy. Can you say more about where that story stands?
Yeah, I mean, it is hard to say, honestly, because sometimes it's queer coding and sometimes it's just stated outright, and then sometimes DC walks it back. I believe that it is canon in the main DCU that Harley and Ivy are not just friends. I believe it is canon that they have some kind of open relationship, that their relationship has a romantic aspect to it, but that they are not necessarily exclusive. And I think that's more so that you can tell stories with each of them on their own easily, and not necessarily because they're going to be hooking up with anybody else. But yeah, that is definitely, that's been a slow growth, as, befitting something where one of the characters is a plant.
Very true. Good pun.
Since the animated series, it's definitely something that came out of their friendship on that show and then came into the comics. And even weird things, I remember there was a Flash animated web series called Gotham Girls, right when I was getting into comics in 2002, 2003, and they were in it. the two of them have been paired across media all over the place. But then, yeah, you'll see something like the TV show calling them best friends, which they are, but that's not the only thing that they are. And then there's also stuff like they were recently in the Heroes in Crisis crossover series earlier this year, which was this like big, serious thing that was supposed to be exploring mental health, but it was actually like a really bad murder mystery, and everybody was out of character, and I disliked it extremely strongly. But that comic was very much about the relationships between these like parallel friendships between Harley and Ivy and Blue Beetle and Booster Gold. And they were really like suggestively intense. Mm-hmm. But Harley and Ivy are supposed to be canonically together, and Blue Beetle and Booster Gold are not. So it in a way kind of undercuts Harley and Ivy because it all falls into this plausible deniability bucket.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly has, and I've read some pieces about this, but though again, I'll defer to your greater knowledge on it. The perception that I've gotten is that DC is really trying to walk a fine line, and I'm not praising them for this, of, on the one hand, giving the people who want to see that content enough to be, at least to be able to somewhat check that box, while still holding the idea of Harley being someone who can still be an object of male fantasy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think, and that's sort of my whole thing with how DC treats Harley across the board. But yeah, like, is she paired with Ivy because DC is including queer characters in their universe, or is she paired with Ivy because that in and of itself is a fantasy for the male gaze?
Right.
And that depends on the creator. It depends on it really depends on the artist a lot, and it depends on the venue that it's being told in. I mean, again, Heroes in Crisis, like, Harley's whole story arc is grieving because Ivy has died. Spoiler, she regrows from a flower, so she's fine. But one of the covers for that series had Ivy lying dead on the floor with her boobs falling out of her costume. That was the cover, this like eroticized image of a dead woman, even though the story was supposed to be this very sympathetic portrayal of mental illness. So there's this real disconnect. And similarly, like, they're telling these stories about, again, the fabulous emancipation of Harley Quinn, but also these stories about how she is destroyed by the Joker. They're telling these really dark stories about how she's like a sadistic killer, but she's also in their all ages line DC superhero girls, like with these books for 7-year-old girls.
Oof. That, yeah, it just seems like there's it's so all over the place in terms of that kind of thing. I'm also glad you brought up the topic of mental illness, because I think that's another area in which I have found the portrayal of Harley Quinn to be kind of all over the place in both some very good and some very negative ways. In some of the iterations I've seen, they're really portraying her as having, very serious PTSD because of her connection to the Joker and because of what Joker did to her. Which is a story that I think plays quite well and is quite relatable. There are other versions, and I think the Suicide Squad movie, unfortunately, is very much this, in which the portrayal of mental illness is the, tee-hee, I'm so crazy and so sexy and who knows what I'm going to do next, which is infuriating in part because of the misogyny of it, but also is just, I feel, so problematic to any actual understanding of mental illness. Just this trope of, it's, I don't know if you would agree with this, but it's, in some ways it feels like that portrayal of Harley Quinn is the dark fantasy version of the Manic Pixie Dream Girl. Is that a connection that kind of makes sense?
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a really, really good way of describing it. And yeah, I mean, the problem with mental illness in comics is always that there's no research done, and that character, I mean, so the Joker, right? He's defined by being insane. The Joker is crazy. Okay, what is his diagnosis?
Right.
Like, he's spent 80 years in Arkham, and they don't have a diagnosis for him? And obviously, like, when the character was created in the early 40s, fine, okay, they weren't going to give him one. I understand why, and we wouldn't want to be beholden to what they laid down as his mental illness back then. Like it would probably be like, I don't know, being poor, you
Right.
know, like so many things were pathologized back then and now. Yeah, it's this sort of vague, this person is crazy. And even when the story is being told sympathetically, it's still, this person is crazy. And so you said that a lot of stories treat Harley as having PTSD, but they don't say that that's what she has. They just say that the Joker drove her insane, which is not a helpful way of framing it.
Right.
And I'm certainly not saying that anybody should be going to a DC comic book for insight into their own mental health issues necessarily, but especially because of the context of the character, like, it would be nice if they took it a bit more seriously and understood that there was a responsibility there. If they understood that if they're going to be portraying a character who is an abuse survivor and mentally ill, that they should do so with respect and sensitivity. But I think even the writers who want to do that are hampered by the fact that they're not really supposed to pin down anything concrete, because what if the next writer doesn't want to do that?
Right. It seems they to some extent want to keep her somewhat of a blank page, both so that different writers can take her in different directions, but also so that more people can relate to her and see themselves in something.
Yeah, well, and also, like, if you say, okay, well, she has, I am throwing this out, like, I'm not saying this is what she has in any way, but if they said, for example, that she was schizophrenic,
Right.
then they could get it wrong. They could describe that incorrectly. Whereas if they say she is crazy, or there's lots of ways you could do that.
Yeah.
And they don't actually have to research what schizophrenia is, or what sociopathy is, or what, any of these things are.
And I'll admit, I am not one who, I don't think I would want to see a diagnosis for the Joker. It's part of why I have such objections to the new movie, though I have many others, and we're not even going to touch that topic. But one thing I've always loved is the idea that the Joker is kind of the Iago figure, in that he, in a world where almost every other Batman villain is pathologized and is given not necessarily a medical diagnosis, but here's this thing that happened, that's why they're crazy in this particular way. That one of the things that makes the Joker stand out so much in the Rogues Gallery is that he does not have that. And that it's one thing I loved about the movie The Dark Knight, is that he keeps kind of making fun of that and telling these lies about where he comes from. But certainly in terms of Harley, I agree with you that it's frustrating that they just use the kind of general moniker of general crazy without any explanation, because, I think it just feeds into a lot of really awful stereotypes about what that can look like, and everything from the manic pixie thing to the violence and all of that. Moving along though a little bit, because I know there's a lot we want to cover. Let's get into sort of the character's actions, and I want to start just by, and obviously this is one that'll kind of have probably a couple different answers over a couple different iterations, but where do you see her in terms of her morality, in terms of her ethics? Is this a villain? Is this an anti-hero? Is this something kind of that breaks those boxes a little bit? Where does Harley fall in terms of her role, in terms, like, because obviously she's an unrepentant criminal, but she also does a lot of good in some ways and is being portrayed more and more heroically?
I mean, I think, again, it depends on which Harley and which medium we're talking about. I will admit, when DC Superhero Girls first launched a few years back, I was like, what on earth are Harley and Ivy doing in this lineup? They are murderers.
Yeah.
Like, they murder people. And this is for 6-year-old girls. Like, I could not...
I didn't realize it was supposed to be for that young.
Oh, yeah. This is, like, for like, kindergartners. This is for very, very young kids. And I was like, this is so incongruous to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't I I guess I've gotten used to her being there. And actually, so the DC Superhero Girls line actually had a revamp this year or maybe last year. So it's a much more classic. They have new designs by Lauren Faust, who did the My Little Pony revamp a few years ago that
Oh, nice.
destroyed the internet. But it's a very good show. And and it's more in line with, she did like a Super Best Friends Forever YouTube series, just featuring Supergirl, Batgirl, and Wonder Woman a few years back that was adorable. So she's sort of building on that. And it's incorporated a few more heroes. Harley and Ivy appear in that, but they are villains. They're not part of the gang. In the original DC Superhero Girls, they were all just kids who attended Superhero High together. And so Harley, I mean, she's adorable. She loves clown stuff. And there is this one comic where they go time traveling in their school bus, because of course they do. And Harley takes a dinosaur egg back with her because she loves dinosaurs and it breaks the time stream and they have to fix things. But like,
Please tell me there's a Ms. Fizzle type character driving that school bus.
it's Liberty Bell actually,
Okay,
which is
that's
so
all.
cute. And they call her Ms. Bell. It's so cute. And I mean, I love that whole line, mostly because like little girls love that whole line,
Yeah.
and that makes me so happy. But she's just like this very sweet, innocent, totally harmless character, who, you know, makes mistakes because of her enthusiasm, but has absolutely no villainous intent whatsoever. I don't think the Joker even exists in that continuity, and I don't think Batman, like, Bruce never shows up. He might be mentioned in passing, but he doesn't appear. And in the new version, again, she's a villain, but it's for very young girls. So she's bad, but like, oh no, the villains are robbing the museum. We have to stop them with a big net, and nobody got hurt.
Right. It's very, very innocent in that kind of way.
Yeah. And again, you know, it's not pathologized at all. There's no Joker, no, like, I mean, it's just started, but I doubt that they will ever be like, and this is how Harley became who she is. She's just a naughty clown, and that's fine. So I think that already, like, within what DC is offering, it really depends on the story that you're looking at. I do think that I have my preferences where Harley is concerned, and if there is a story where she is just sadistic or really just evil without any redeeming qualities, that feels like a misunderstanding of the character to me, and a misunderstanding of what's appealing about her.
Yeah.
Like, there was that's sort of where the New 52 Suicide Squad Harley was. There's like the whole storyline where she, like, the Joker, like, removed his face, and she was like stealing his face and killing people and then putting his face on them, and it was all very gory and morbid and just gross. And I mean, I can't say that's not Harley, because it was. They published Harley stories like that. But to me, it misses the entire appeal of the character. But at the same time, I don't necessarily want to see her as a hero or all sweetness and light. I think a mischievous villain who has a soft spot for the underdog is a good place to put her.
I mean, certainly in the Suicide Squad movie, the way they portray her in this is of an interesting realm, because at first she has no sort of altruistic motives for joining the Suicide Squad. It's purely I'm going to die if I don't do this, so I have to do it. But they do develop a theme of that she's of the sort who, like, she doesn't care if Joe on the street dies, but if you're someone she cares about, if you're her family, and that includes the underdog, she'll defend you to the last. And the movie does a terrible job of establishing why she would care about anyone else, but it's an interesting idea there at least. And I think that there's some really good points there, especially because one of the things that I liked a lot, especially about her version in the Batman the Animated Series, is I never saw her in that as being that kind of sadistic, evil, laughing maniacally at cruelty kind of character. What I got from her more than anything was that she is so obsessive in her need for Joker's approval. If I remember at first, that's not painted as, she's painted as a hench person, but not as a romantic, it's not a romantic connection necessarily. I think that comes later in Batman the Animated Series or later in other things, but either way, it's much more of a like, oh, can I do nefarious things enough to earn, approval of Joker? Which, that has all of its own issues about the link with Joker, and I'm glad we're breaking away from that. But that portrayal always seemed a lot realer to me and a lot more interesting than just, she's just evil for the sake of evil. Do you have to say, I don't know how recently you've seen the animated series, but does that connect for you in terms of kind of where you...
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I also think, like, I agree with you that she was in more of a henchman role. Like, they were not... I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that they were in a romantic relationship, because I don't think he cared.
Yeah.
Like, not just because... Like, I just don't think that that's anything on the Joker's mental map at all. I don't think that it's a disregard of Harley. I just think that that's not who the Joker is as a person. Like, I certainly don't believe that he's capable of love.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, I don't think, I totally agree with you. Like, I don't see Harley as this, as somebody who's doing horrible things for the sake of horrible things. I think with Harley, it's really important that she have a goal. And I think often the approach that DC has taken is, first, her goal is, as you said, winning the Joker's approval. And then once she breaks free of him, her goal is often helping other women,
right?
Which is a story that I love. I think that's wonderful. The problem for me is that DC kind of keeps bouncing back and forth.
Yeah.
And I know that in reality, like, walking away from abuse is not as easy as like, well, I'm done and I sang my kiss off song and I'm heading out the door with my suitcase and my sassy hat. Like, yep. I know that it's more difficult than that, but DC has control of this story. And I don't think that when they have Harley go back to the Joker, I don't think it's because they want to realistically portray how difficult it is to leave an abuser. I think it's because they think it'll sell more comic books.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's true. And I think that's, like, to me, the most interesting ethically portrayal of her is of that kind of the avenging angel of the abused woman, you know? Mm-hmm. And that's a role that we've seen others play, but I think has not been explored. There's still a lot of room in that to explore, especially because it gets into so many great ethical and moral questions of what happens when you are doing terrible things to terrible people in order to rescue people from those terrible people. You know, like, in some ways that a character like that can raise a lot of the same questions as the Punisher, but actually in a lot more interesting ways, because she has a much more focus on why she's doing it, and it's much less personal feeling as much as it is, you know, sort of, I've been there, I know what it's like. Well,
the other thing about the difference between her and the Punisher too is that Frank has pretty much every axis of privilege there is.
Yeah.
Certainly, I would not say that Frank is not also mentally ill. Like, he clearly also has PTSD and numerous other conditions. But he is a straight white dude. Mm-hmm. He is a straight white Christian dude. Harley is a bisexual Jewish woman.
Yeah.
So the idea of, it feels different to have someone with all the privilege say, oh no, I was hurt, I'm going to hurt everybody, versus somebody who lacks privilege in significant ways. And like, Harley still, I mean, she's still white, she's still able-bodied, but somebody who lacks privilege in significant ways saying, I was hurt, not I'm going to hurt everybody, but I'm going to stop bad people from hurting other people.
Right. I mean, in some ways, I don't think they've ever been this explicit with it, but a way they could lean into that idea of how hard it is to leave the abuser is to have her, you know, basically taking this tack of, you know, I want to protect you. I know that you're never going to leave your abuser, so I'm just going to kill him. Which, raises all sorts of moral questions, but you can very much understand it from that perspective of her, and I think I may have seen a story like this before, but that idea of, that her trying to help people get away from their abusers, her seeing them go back to their abusers again and again and being so frustrated by that and deciding to just kill the guy.
I would not at all be surprised if there is one or several Harley stories with exactly that plot line. There is definitely, there are a lot of stories where she protects kids.
Mm-hmm.
There's one from the Batman Black and White series that ran in like the early 2000s, where Harley and Ivy are like out doing a crime, but they're wearing their costumes. And this little girl comes running up to them, thinks they're superheroes because they're wearing costumes. And she asks them for help, and they realize that this guy is trying to kidnap her. And so they save her, and they're like beating up this guy, and Batman shows up and he's like, "Excuse you." And the little girl is like, "No, it's okay, Batman. These two Batgirls saved me." And he's like, kind of takes a minute to take in the situation. He's like, "Great job, Batgirls. I'll take the guy and put him in real jail and not whatever you were going to do to him, but you did good."
Which they probably take both as flattering and an incredible insult all at the same time.
Yeah, it's a really, really lovely story. And there's also, Harley has this really interesting arc in the Injustice. I guess it's the same arc in the video games. I haven't played the games, but I read the Injustice 2 comic, which is the tie-in comic to the video game Injustice 2, where it's a very dark universe where Superman has gone evil and taken over, which I hate everything that I just said there, but Harley becomes a hero and is working with Batman, and she is put into situations where she is repeatedly protecting children. Like, I think she has a daughter in that storyline, and she's also protecting some of the other heroes' kids, and at the end she joins the Justice League.
Oh, wow.
Like, okay.
That's a stretch.
She's kind of earned it. And yeah, like this idea that, Harley has done bad things, but when she sees someone else being victimized, she can't not step in, I think is a really key part of the character.
Right.
And it's a sympathy that goes both ways, because I also think that one of her best appearances in the animated series was the episode Harley's Holiday, where she gets a clean bill of health from Arkham, and she gets out, and then everything is going horribly wrong, and she's trying to do the right thing, but it keeps backfiring on her, and she finally almost gives up and is like, okay, then I'm going to return to a life of crime because this isn't working. And Batman shows up and helps her and gives her the benefit of the doubt. And at the end, she's like, "Why did you help me?" And he says, "Because I had a bad day once too."
Yeah.
Which is one of the best Batman moments ever. But it also, that's who Harley is. Like, you said earlier, what do you think Harley is? And I was like, well, I don't want to, rule on this. But no, I am. That's who Harley is. She's someone who understands other people's suffering.
Yeah. And in a way, one of the next big questions I wanted to get into was Harley and her relationships. And one of the first I want to talk about is the relationship between Harley and Batman. That episode was one I was definitely going to want to talk about because it's such a perfect distillation of the character. And one of the things that I was thinking about, and I think that episode kind of underlines, is you were talking about how Harley is someone who is seen as villainous, but is doing it because of, in a lot of portrayals at least, is to protect the people who she thinks are not being protected by the society. In my mind, we often don't talk about the fact that Batman is, by any definition, a straight-up criminal. He's, and his whole justification is, the society I live in is so broken and so corrupt that the systems within the legal system have utterly failed. I have to go outside the legal system to do what's right. And the reason I'm bringing that all up is I think, especially as we get into more portrayals of Harley that are about, her protecting the people she thinks are not being protected, to me, there's very much a continuum then that her and Batman are on. And it just becomes a question of, if you're saying that there's a bright line that Batman's on one side and Harley's on the other, I'm not sure that makes sense, because if they're both seen in that kind of a way, then for both of them it's about how broken is the society and how far are you willing to go. And clearly Harley's willing to go a lot further than Batman, and I'm not trying to heroize her. There's obviously a lot of, she's willing to break a lot more eggs than Batman is, and do it a lot more for personal gain. But I do think there's a connection there, in that they both see themselves as people who have been greatly hurt by the normal system and thus have to step outside the system to get any kind of justice, let alone, sanity for their lives.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think again, it sort of goes back to the same issue with the Punisher. Like, if Frank has more privilege than Harley, Bruce has insanely more privilege than Harley. And like, in the real world, I would be so much more comfortable with a woman who is like, you know what, my boyfriend abused me, so I kill abusive men, than I would with a billionaire who decided that the police department wasn't doing crime fighting right, so he would, like...
Right, poor people killed my parents, so I'm going to kill all poor people.
Or even just punch him in the face.
Yeah.
But that's why, Batman does not work in a real world context for exactly that reason. But no, I agree with you. I think that there are lines that Bruce will not cross that are established parts of his character that we know. Like, he does not use guns. He does not kill. He has done both of those things, but we don't count those because those were bad stories. Mm-hmm. But theoretically, he does not use guns. He does not kill. By and large, he follows the law when he doesn't have to break it for, like, in order to protect other people. Like, he wouldn't steal.
Right.
Because, I mean, he doesn't need to, but he just wouldn't, like, unless he had to do it to save somebody for whatever reason. I think Harley does have lines, but her lines are much less defined by societal rules. Like, Bruce is neutral good. Harley is chaotic something.
Chaotic neutral.
She's chaotic. It depends on the story. Maybe she's chaotic good, maybe she's chaotic neutral, maybe she's chaotic evil. It really does depend. But she's much less interested in what the laws actually are and more interested in who is hurting who right now.
Right. I think that's a great explanation. I mean, what I was thinking of as you were saying that is Batman I keep going back to the Dark Knight, the Christopher Nolan movies, because I think that's probably my favorite portrayal of Batman outside of the animated series. But in both of those, the impression I get is that Batman is someone who wants to live in a world where he isn't needed. He wants to eventually get to a point where the police system isn't corrupt and the criminals don't have as much power, and he can step back into the shadows and stop doing what he's doing. And we can argue till the cows come home about whether he's actually moving the world further away from that goal or closer. But Harley, I think, doesn't care about that kind of thing. She thinks the whole system is nuts and that the legal system is nuts and that it's never going to be savable. And she doesn't really have as much of a defined criminal philosophy. She just, like you said, she has no problem doing what she thinks needs to be done, and to hell with what anyone else thinks, including the law.
Well, yeah, I think also, Batman is defined by being a planner.
Right.
So, of course, he's looking ahead to what needs to happen tomorrow, what needs to happen in 10 years, like, what is the future, what kind of future am I trying to build here? And Harley exists entirely in the present. With, obviously the past trauma is there and it's relevant, but I can't even envision Harley thinking about the future. And by future, I mean 5 minutes from now. Like, that's just not...
She's walking, talking id.
Yeah, she's pure impulsiveness. I almost say she's pure impulse, but that's a different DC character. And I would love a team up between the two of them. That would be amazing.
That'd be great to see. So let's talk about another one of her relationships. And we've hinted at it a bunch. Not even hinted at it, but just to kind of put it all out on the table, let's talk about her relationship with Joker and why it's so problematic. What's your what's your read on that relationship, and especially in the evolution of how it's been portrayed? Because it certainly seems to me that it was always an unhealthy relationship, but the way it's been portrayed has gotten a lot worse.
Yeah, I think it's just as comics, there was, especially in the decade, everybody says, oh, when I started reading comics, they were good and then they got bad. I really do think that between like 2003, 2013, like that decade, really the 2010s, were an extremely dark time for comics, and creators were really invested in, or it's not the 2010s, the 2000s. Creators were really invested in one-upping each other. And like, you'll see a lot of jokes when people talk about that era of DC Comics, that everybody was getting their arm chopped off all the time. But it's true. You open up any DC comic and somebody's getting their arm cut off. I mean, I remember around like 2010, I was on the subway reading a Teen Titans graphic novel, and this was after the Teen Titans cartoon had gone off the air and before Teen Titans Go had come back on. But like, it was in there. It was still like in rotation on Cartoon Network, and these are the same characters, and there's this small child sitting next to me, and I had to tilt the comic away so that he wouldn't see that what was happening on the page was that the Clock King had cut a bunch of people's heads in half, and so you could see their skulls split open, all the blood everywhere. And so, in essence, I think the Harley and Joker story has not really changed. It's the same story. It's just that Batman the Animated Series, for a number of reasons. One, it was a children's cartoon, so they couldn't go too dark or too explicit, which I have heard that's why Mad Love was a comic before it was an episode, because they couldn't get it past the censors initially, but I couldn't find any corroboration of that online. That might have just been what my friend said when she lent me the comic when we were 17. But it definitely has some like saucy jokes in there. Like there's this great moment where Harley is wearing a negligee and she says, "Come on, Puddin', don't you want to rev up your Harley?" And it's hilarious. Yeah. Like it's a sex joke with Harley, but she's in control of it. And anyway, I think that the story itself between the two of them has not, in essence, changed. It's just that we went through a period where comics were showing how very dark they could be.
Right. Just
for the sake of being dark. And so the story, even if you address it obliquely, is still horrifying.
Yeah.
It's just that the later writers kind of took our faces and rubbed it in the story the way you do when like a dog has an accident on the floor and you're like, see, don't ever do that again, except it wasn't our fault and they were still rubbing our faces in it.
Yeah. Well, and I guess, and maybe what I've seen is more just from the TV show and the movies, and maybe you can tell me if this doesn't happen in the evolution of the comics. But certainly, like, when I watch Batman the Animated Series, I think it would be very difficult for anyone to walk away from viewing Joker and Harley in that context as relationship goals. Then, flash forward to the video games and then the movie Suicide Squad, and you now have not only Harley being much more sexualized, but her relationship with Joker being much more sexualized in a much more kind of darkly erotic BDSM, it's fucked up, but that's because you don't understand their nature of love kind of a way. And certainly that was about when I started, all of the relationship goals kind of memes that I saw were always either images from the video games or more recently from the movie. And so I guess on screen at least, it did seem like there was a marked change between the viewers between the creators saying, this is really fucked up and we're going to rub your faces in it, towards more of, this is really fucked up and we're going to show you that maybe it's kind of something fun and cool. I'm kind of wondering if either you don't see that in the on-screen versions, or if did that kind of the evolution happen in the comics as well, or is it just gone a different direction?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's just the on-screen versions. I think it's just that, like I said, millions more people are familiar with the on-screen versions.
Right.
So those are the ones that are going to be more popular. But, even a decade ago, I was seeing fights on the internet every February because people would start their, okay, who are your favorite couples in comics? And somebody would throw out Joker and Harley, and there would be fights because some people are like, yeah, they should be on the list of best couples in comics. And some people would say, no, they absolutely shouldn't. And some of the people who wanted them on there wanted them there because they were iconic.
Mm-hmm.
And some people wanted them there because they were, relationship goals, I guess, in whatever way.
Right.
And there was always pushback against the idea that this was anything to be idealized or romanticized. And I do think, I don't necessarily think that DC is super interested in selling us the two of them as an aspirational love story. I can't speak to the Suicide Squad movie,
Right.
but that's not something that I see in the comics. But so, like, for example, one of the Black Label comics that's coming out now, and Black Label is the sort of R-rated, adults-only imprint that DC started either this year or last year. And these are supposed to be, like, kind of prestige format, more, I guess, highbrow takes on the characters, and they have a really highly pedigreed lineup of creators. So Harley and the Joker are appearing in two comics right now. One is called Joker Harley Criminal Sanity, and it's like a sort of Silence of the Lambs thing where she's a forensic psychiatrist and he's a serial killer and she's trying to catch him. But the other one is called Harleen, and it's her origin story. So it's Harley as a psychiatrist starting to work at Arkham and gradually falling into the Joker's trap.
Right.
It is a beautiful comic. It's really well written. It's really well drawn. I can't pronounce the creator's name, for which I apologize, but it is a writer artist. Like he's doing the whole thing. It's like Stepyan. I can't pronounce it. If you're listening, I'm very sorry that I can't pronounce your name, sir. It's a beautiful comic. But
though, if you are listening, please write in because we're thrilled to have you on our listenership. And if you want to be our next guest, we'll get you on. Anyway, go on.
But at the same time, I don't necessarily understand why we need to give this story that kind of real estate. Mm-hmm. Like, what is the value in telling the story again of how a woman met a man and he broke her and then she was broken? Because that's what this story is. And there was, so like the month before this story came out, like before the first issue came out, there was an interview with the creator in the back of pretty much every comic that DC was putting out, like the prior month. And in it, he said that Harleen is basically like a romance novel, except it has the logical ending and not the idealized one. Right. And I was like, wow, you have never read a romance novel ever in your whole entire life. But sort of the premise there, and I'm assuming that he meant specifically like that Beauty and the Beast story where like she thinks she can change him with her love.
Right.
I think that that's way less prevalent than men think it is. Mm-hmm. It sort of goes back to the whole, why is she falling for that guy who sucks and not me who is great?
Right.
Like, that's not really a thing that women are super in. Like, yeah, I guess there are women who fall in love with serial killers, but it's not common, and most women are not into it. But sort of the idea that this story is the logical ending. And romance novels where a woman finds happiness in a genre that is almost entirely created by and for women and is the highest selling genre in publishing, is idealized and illogical. Oh, that quote really bothered me.
Yeah, no, it sounds incredibly misogynistic and just wrong.
I think it was just, it was not well thought out at all. But yeah, it's this, it's not that the relationship between the Joker and Harley is being romanticized by DC, but it is being fetishized.
I can see that.
Like, their love is not fetishized, but his abuse of her is.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's really the heart of my question, because I was going to say I wish you'd seen Suicide Squad so we could talk about it, but I wouldn't wish that on anyone, to be honest. But I do think, and listeners, if you've seen Suicide Squad, the movie, or the video games, please write in and tell me if you disagree with me. I do think that there, at least, they make a departure, and that in the making of that movie, they are very intentionally trying to hold it out. Again, it's that kind of walking the line. Like, they show it as abusive and crazy enough that some people will go, oh, that's so abusive. But they're very clearly romanticizing it and sexualizing it. Like, her creation story is shown as this incredibly romantic, he is freeing her from the mental bonds of society, and he is, tearing away the chains that hold her in place, and the scene of her sort of coming up from the chemical bath that he throws her into is just done in this almost like Dirty Dancing, like lifting her up kind of a way. And to the point where it makes me wonder, and I remember I did a lot of reading and I saw a lot of other theories about this at the time, that movie was coming out really riding the crest of, Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey, and a lot of these other fictions that were also, really romanticizing very abusive relationships. And ones that were not actually in any way indicative of, because I'm not trying to by any means say that like BDSM is unhealthy. I think most people in those communities, would say that those movies are incredibly unhealthy versions of that kind of dynamic. And so I do think that the makers of the Suicide movie especially were trying to have, they were trying to push some of that relationship goals idea. But from what I'm hearing from you, it does sound like that's a somewhat isolated incident in the way Harley is portrayed, which is really refreshing to hear. That it's not something the comics really dived hard into.
Again, like I sort of, as I was researching this article that I was working on, I dipped into what was available right now, like among the Harley comics right now. So I certainly am not going to say that like that the movie is alone in that portrayal and that the comics do not ever romanticize the relationship.
Right.
But that to me feels more like something I would have seen circa Gotham City Sirens, which would have been like 2009.
Yeah. And
not necessarily something that I would expect to see now, and I think that's largely because Harley, for comic book readers, is very much her own character now. She is a bigger name than the Joker. She sells more than the Joker, and she is in more comics than the Joker. So they're still going to tell her origin story over and over again, because they do that with every character. Mm-hmm. It's just that none of the other marquee characters have abuse in their backstories.
Yeah.
But they're not going to emphasize the actual relationship between them in that way, because why bother? They don't need to have him there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've certainly heard that. I've been paying a lot of attention to the stories about the upcoming Birds of Prey movie, and one of the stories that I'm hearing quite a bit, and again, the stories that come out of Hollywood, it's always a question about how much is this real and how much of this is studio spin. But certainly the portrayal that I've often heard is that Margot Robbie has much more control over this version of the movie, and that she was not thrilled with the way Harley and the Joker were portrayed in the first movie, but that in this one she really wants to see this movie follow the direction the comics have gone and make it much more about clearly her and the Joker were a bad idea and a bad relationship, and now this movie is about her exploring her freedom after that. Yeah, that's absolutely the impression that I've gotten from everything I've heard as well. I mean,
From all the stories coming out of the filming of Suicide Squad, it sounds like nobody had a good time on that set.
Yeah.
And nobody was thrilled with the results. But yeah, I believe she's executive producing the current one. And it was, even when they first started talking about this movie, it was, oh yeah, Margot Robbie wants to make a Harley Quinn movie. Oh, Margot Robbie wants to make Birds of Prey. Oh, I guess it's happening now? Like, it really seems not just that she has more control, but like it probably would not have happened if she had not pushed for it really strongly. So
right.
like, I really hope it's good, because I love the Birds of Prey. This is a different lineup than we're used to, but like every single character that they've pulled into this movie, I love all of them. I love many, like the actresses who are in this movie who I'm familiar with their work. I love them. Like I really hope it's good.
Right. Well, and in some ways, that would be kind of an incredible story to be able to have of, it again, we're projecting a lot, but if my understanding is correct of, Margot Robbie playing the character in the way that first movie called for, which was kind of, her acting was amazing, her portrayal was really powerful, but was also very sexualized in ways that I understand she was not thrilled with, but are probably a big part of how that character became so popular. She's a very attractive person in that movie. And so I would kind of love if the end result of the story is that she kind of leans into that male gaze version of the character, winds up getting enough, studio power that now she can take the character in a direction that's much more true to the writing and much more true to what she wants to play.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a very Harley way of doing things, but it's actually a very Catwoman way of doing things, but that's okay. They're friends. Maybe she picks something up.
That's actually one more of the relationships I wanted to explore, and then we're going to start wrapping up pretty soon, is you kept talking about how Harley has become so incredibly popular, and you mentioned her in regard to a lot of other characters. You didn't say anything in regard to Catwoman, but it does certainly seem like Catwoman is getting a lot less attention as well. And I'm wondering, do you think it's fair to say, like, Catwoman certainly always had a similar, is she a villain, is she a hero, is she an anti-hero? She's a bad girl, and that's very sexualized, and her flirtations with Batman and the like. Do you think it's fair to say that Harley has started to take on a kind of a role in the canon similar to what Catwoman either maybe still plays or had played?
Yeah, I mean, I think she's absolutely, at least in terms of the comics, comparable in prominence to Catwoman, no question. And increasingly so in sort of the multimedia aspects. It's also worth pointing out that Catwoman hasn't appeared in not a comic in a long time.
Yeah,
like
I think the Anne Hathaway, Christopher Nolan, I think was the last time.
And that was years and years ago. She's also on Gotham.
Yeah, Serena Kyle becoming Catwoman appears in Gotham, but
yeah, but I mean, who watches Gotham? Honestly, like that was not.
I did, but not many people did.
No, it lasted a long time, and it was really hard to find people who were actually watching it. It was very mysterious. But also, she was like a 12-year-old.
Yeah.
So, like, they didn't really go for the, oh, I'm so slinky, I'm a cat, and I'm here to have sex with you, which, like, thank God, because she was 12. But yeah, I think it'll be interesting to sort of revisit that question after because she's going to be in a movie now too. Zoe Kravitz is playing Catwoman in, I think it's The Batman, the
Robert Pattinson one.
Yeah, exactly. So that'll be an interesting dynamic.
Interesting.
So maybe Catwoman will kind of rise in prominence, and certainly like she has her own comic right now,
right?
And Tom King has used her very extensively in his Batman run, so she does usually appear in guaranteed at least one, but usually at least 2 or 3 comics a month these days, so it's not like she's a rare sighting,
right? Well, and that would be nice too, because we've talked a lot about Harley's relationship to the Joker and a little bit about her relationship with Bruce and with Batman. But certainly the more I think about it, the more I think that, like, I would really love to see a Harley that's not only free of the Joker, but is free of Batman as well. Because, especially in her origins, but especially in a lot of the portrayals, she's kind of this character who's getting bounced. She's kind of this pawn in between Batman and the Joker. And so seeing Catwoman continue to be that kind of sexual, hero, anti-hero foil to Batman, and Harley getting to do stuff that is just separate from both Batman and Joker, that seems like a really good direction for that character.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I would necessarily describe Catwoman that way. I don't think I'm not 100% in love with Tom King's storyline, but he's very much telling, or it seems to be attempting to tell like an epic love story with them. It's not like she's not really sexualized aggressively, and she has her own comic where she has left Gotham and
Nice.
she is doing her own thing. And her, facing off, like the main villain she's facing off against is a rich old woman. Now, how long that will last, who knows? She's going to end up back in Gotham.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, Catwoman is a Batman supporting character, whether she's a villain or an anti-hero. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
I think that, tons of characters are, at the end of the day, are supporting characters. And that's fine. Like, Jimmy Olsen is a Superman supporting character. Cool. That's where he, like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I don't really have a problem with that. And I don't think that it precludes Selina being a three-dimensional and complex character who gets to carry her own stories. But I think actually Harley, to a certain extent, because she has so many comics, is breaking away from being a Batman supporting character. I mean, she's certainly not a Batman character in the movies at all, because he's not in those movies.
And to be very clear, as I said at the beginning, I'm very much a filthy casual here. My only real exposure to the Catwoman character is in the movies and on screen, where I think you don't ever see her outside of that role that I described in regard to Batman. But it's really, I appreciate you kind of filling that in and correcting me there, that it sounds like in the comics, she really has gotten to evolve in a lot of ways that has not happened on screen.
Yeah, and like one of the things that I really appreciate about things like the Gotham Girls Flash animation series and Gotham City Sirens and to a certain extent Birds of Prey is that it is predicated on the idea of all these female characters are hanging out together. So you'll have Harley and Ivy and Catwoman and sometimes Batgirl, and sometimes they'll throw in another couple of characters, and they are all initially Batman supporting characters, but this is about their own stories and their own relationships with each other that don't have to do with him. I don't necessarily think that DC always, like, that's what they are theoretically. Mm-hmm. Often, in actual fact, it's just a chance to draw 3 pairs of boobs and not just one.
Yeah.
But theoretically, these are stories about women that are not defined by Batman being there putting them in jail.
Right. Yeah, no, and that definitely sounds powerful. And I can see how there's still always that push-pull of how much of this is male gaze versus how much of this is female empowerment and all the gray area in between those two.
Well, DC wants all those audiences. Like, they want the guys who are buying the comic because it has hot chicks in it to buy the comic. And they also want women who want a story of empowerment and female friendship to buy the comic. Yeah. And it's also why they have, a Harley for 6-year-old girls and multiple Harleys in R-rated, super gory serial killer stories, because they want all those audiences. And in a lot of, I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing to have different versions of a character for different markets. Like, you have Batman starring in I Can Read books, and you have Batman also starring in super gory R-rated serial killer comics, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. But what you don't have are Batman stories that are solely about, like, reveling in the abuse in his history, or Batman stories that exist only so that people can jerk off to them. And I'm not saying we need those, but that's the discrepancy. Like, you have all these different Batmans, but they all still respect Batman as a character, And that's not the case with all the different Harleys.
Well, and it underlines a point I've often made, which is that when we get into discussions of these big companies and the sort of the directions they seem to be taking in terms of like questions of sexism or racism or things like that, most of the time it seems like it's not that DC has this strong, that they want either the, yay women as sex objects or yay women empowerment. They just want to make money, and that's what they're selling.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's good that we're critiquing it and talking about those terms.
Yeah, and what they used to do was just put a really sleazy cover on a female-led story and try to get everybody to buy that one thing, and it didn't work, because half the readers didn't like the cover and half the readers didn't like the story. So now they just do two different comics.
Right. So we want to wrap up pretty quick. I want to get to this Little Mermaid too, but let me just end this last question then. What's your hope for the future with Harley, especially as she is getting her own the Suicide the Birds of Prey movies coming out? She's getting her own TV show coming out pretty soon that's animated. What would you really like to see happen with Harley, both on print and on screen?
I hope the movie is good. I want to see it would only be our second successful female-led superhero movie, because Elektra and Catwoman and Supergirl were all bombs. Mm-hmm. We have Captain Marvel, but it would be really nice to have a second one. I hope it's good. I hope that if it is good, that they get to make more. And I hope that it encourages Marvel and DC to make more female-led stories. I want the show to be good. With all of the DC Universe stuff, I'm like, don't have too many good shows because then I'll have to get the streaming service.
Yeah, I really don't want to do that.
Right? But like, if it has to exist, I would like for it to be good. And like I said, I'm fine with there being a wide range of Harleys, with there being Harleys who are just like sweet, heroic kids characters, and Harleys who are more complicated than that or more violent than that for older audiences, and then Harleys who are right in the middle. I thought that Breaking Glass, the YA graphic novel that I mentioned at the beginning of this, was honestly one of my favorite books I've read all year. I thought it was phenomenal. I'm fine with there being Harleys for all these different audiences. I just want those Harleys to be treated with respect, because this character is so important to so many people because they relate to what she's been through. And I guess the shorter answer to your question that I've been answering for 10 minutes is that I want the people who look at Harley and see themselves to see themselves in stories that they feel respected by.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to phrase it. I'm going to close with a different question on a completely different subject, but just because it's one I'm dying to ask you, and you kept talking about wanting to see more female-led media. How are we feeling about the Scarlett Johansson Black Widow movie? In 30 seconds. I'm sure you don't have complicated feelings about that one.
Yeah, no, like I want more female-led movies. I feel, honestly, this may be a weird comparison, but I feel about it kind of the way I felt about Brave, the Pixar movie, when that came out, when it finally dropped, and it was just fine. Like, I love Merida. Merida is basically what would happen if Pixar looked at me and were like, we're going to animate her. Like, literally, when that movie came out, people were like, why did they make a movie about you? And I was like, I don't know.
I think this means the next time I have you on, you have to do the whole podcast in a Scottish accent.
Oh, I'm so sorry, future listeners. I don't know how to do that.
But anyway, go on.
I'll just be in character as Scrooge McDuck.
There you go.
But yeah, no, I love Merida. The movie itself was just fine.
Yeah.
But because Pixar had waited 10 movies to finally tell a story about a girl, it had to be all things to all people, and it had to be the greatest movie of all time, and that's too much pressure. And I didn't feel bad for them because they'd waited forever.
Yeah.
And similarly with Black Widow, we should have had a Black Widow movie greenlit as soon as the first showing of Avengers ended, because she was amazing in that movie, and people came out of that just loving that character, and they didn't bother to do it. And in the interim, she was wonderful in that movie. She was wonderful in The Winter Soldier. The movies treated her like crap in every single appearance after that. And then they killed her off in favor of a nothing character that nobody cares about, because he had kids and she was infertile. So
she's not a real woman, clearly, and all the bullshit around that.
Yeah. And when you add on to that the fact that Scarlett Johansson does not seem to be able to open her mouth anymore without putting her foot in it and just saying the most offensive things and taking the most offensive roles and then getting defensive when people call her on it. Like, I'm not going to see it. I'm not supporting her as an actress because the things that she's said are too hateful.
Yeah.
And I have no interest in this story anymore, even though I really like Natasha as a character in the movies and the comics. And I understand why they've greenlit this because she is an A-list actress and the character is already established. But Marvel has a huge stable of other female characters that they could be turning to who don't have all this baggage. And I would much rather have, 10 movies about them to maybe balance out all the ones about dudes that we're still getting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heard at one point a rumor, I don't think there's any possibility it's true, but of doing a movie set in Wakanda but with Shuri as the star. And I would just like that'd be amazing. I'd love to see that.
I would love that.
Yeah, I have that kind of similar set of feelings. And I'm still back and forth and not sure if I'm going to see it because there's a part of me that doesn't want there to be any chance of saying, the woman-led movie didn't do well, so we shouldn't do more. But also, yeah, I hate the idea of giving money to support Scarlett Johansson as an actress in these and all the other stuff you talked about. So, yeah, it's what we actually just did an episode. Our last episode was on problematic favorites, and this question came up. And so when I had you here, I wanted to make sure we asked about it because I think it's very, very loosely related to Harley, but tied in all the other questions we're talking about female-led media and how that's important to support and where the limits of that are.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, thank you again so much for coming on. Give it just a quick, for people who are hearing you for the first time or just want to know more, how can our listeners, I know you do a podcast, you also do a lot of writing. How can people find you and follow you and hear more of your thoughts on these things?
So I do have a podcast. It is intermittently updated, but it is called Flights and Tights, a Superman movie podcast. And my co-host and I have been watching all of the Superman movies and talking about how very disappointed we usually are because we love Superman very much and most of the movies are very bad. I write for BookRiot.com, mostly about comics, but also about other stuff. So you can find me there. And I'm on Twitter at Jess_Plummer, where I tweet intermittently also about comics and, as alluded to before, Scrooge McDuck.
Yeah, I don't yet know what the ethics of DuckTales is yet, but if we find that episode, we will have you on for that episode at some point. Well, thank you again so much for being on.
You should watch the new show.
Say again?
The ethics are that you should watch the new show. That's the ethical choice.
That's what I keep hearing. Where is it? Is it available on Netflix?
Maybe the first season is.
Okay.
It's on, you can watch it on, GoDisney.com or whatever they have an actual website where you can stream their shows.
I am committed to the new Disney streaming service, so I'll definitely be able to watch it there.
Yeah, it'll be on Disney Plus.
I have a whole bunch of old Star Wars episodes to go through and then talk to Becky Allen about, but after that, we'll get you on for DuckTales. So, again, and to all our listeners, thank you all so much for sticking with us. What are your thoughts? As we both referenced, Harley is an incredibly ubiquitous character today, and one that a lot of people have a lot of opinions on. What are yours? Where do you agree with one or both of us, or disagree with one or both of us? Let us know. There's a lot of great ways to contact us. The easiest is probably on Facebook or Twitter. You can find us on both of those at Superhero Ethics. And in Facebook especially, we have a page. We also have a group. The group is better for discussions. You have to click on Ask to be part of the group. I'll immediately approve you, though. And we've been having some great discussions about the episodes. Would love to hear your thoughts there or to tweet at us. You can also email us at superheroethics@gmail.com or leave comments on the website directly. For anyone who wants to support the podcast, we haven't talked about this in a bit, but I wanted to remind people we do have a Patreon. It's a great way to help, show your support for what we do, help support, among other things, people have noticed that our sound quality is pretty good, in large part due to Jacob being our editor. So if this episode is not as good, that's entirely my fault. But we would love to upgrade our microphones and some stuff like that. Patreon's a great way to support us that way. So on behalf of myself and Jessica, again, thank you so much. To all your listeners, thank you for being a part of this, and have a great day.